Everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on building bridges to welcome LGBTI refugees. This webinar is made possible by the support of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. I'm Hannah Carswell, and I'm the project manager of the Welcoming Refugees project at Welcoming America. I'm pleased to be your moderator on this webinar about this very important work. Creating welcoming communities is really about making sure that everyone in the entire community feels welcome. Building bridges between refugee-serving and LGBTI-serving organizations to create a more welcoming environment for all refugees is one way for all of us to move closer to making our communities really welcoming. So first, I'd like to give you an idea of our webinar today. Acevedo, who's the director of the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture and Refugee Resettlement Programs of the Gulf Coast Jewish Family and Community Services. Then we'll move on to talking about collaboration at more of a big picture level with Benny Luzau, who leads the LGBTI Caucus of Refugee Congress. After hearing about their work, we will open it up for your questions and comments. We hope to have a rich discussion, and I encourage you to chat in your questions webinar. We have an hour scheduled for this conversation, and our speakers have so much to cover, so I want to go ahead and dive in. I will now turn the floor over to Bob Carey from OR for his introductory remarks.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you for today's webinar, which focuses on important ways to make communities more welcoming for all refugees. We know that coming to the U.S. as a refugee is never easy. Those who identify as LGBTI face additional hurdles. Many have experienced persecution in their countries of origin and transit, or countries of first asylum, and may not be aware of or able to access resources that are available in the U.S. to ease their migration. Refugee resettlement agencies and other community-based organizations have a critical role to play in this process. By collaborating with local LGBTI serving organizations, connect LGBTI refugees, the organization works with the greater LGBTI community and ensure that they are receiving culturally sensitive support. Today, you'll hear an inspiring example of how a team of organizations in Florida have worked together to create more welcoming communities with a focus on the diverse LGBTI community. We'll also hear about how the LGBTI Caucus of the Refugee Congress has been working to welcome refugees and communities throughout the country. To all of you on this call, as people who care deeply about welcoming refugees and other new Americans, will challenge yourselves to build collaborations with LGBTI serving organizations in order to serve all refugees and create more welcoming communities for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for giving in remarks. So now we're going to move to Brian Wilson from SunServe with an overview of the terminology that we'll be hearing throughout the webinar.
Good. I just wanted to be sure that we all share the same definitions as we move forward through this presentation. Gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex are for what the acronym LGBTI stands. The acronym has evolved over the last couple of decades and has come to include QIAA, SP, but for today's presentation, we're going to focus on LGBTI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. Of lesbian, gay, bisexual, referring to sexual orientation, the individuals to whom we are attracted, with whom we form romantic relationships, whom we target in romantic relationships, and transgender, referring to gender identity. Gender identity meaning the gender with which our mind corresponds. Intersex refers specifically to biological sex. It is evolution of an outdated and often offensive term, hermaphrodite, which refers to an individual with specifically a penis and a vagina. Intersex refers to the spectrum of characteristics that individuals can have. So as we move forward, I wanted to be sure that we understood as a group the difference between sexual orientation, to whom we are attracted and with whom we form romantic bonds, and gender identity. It defines the gender with which we identify, and sex, which is biological and includes the sex characteristics that we are assigned, not just genitalia, but also body hair, where fat deposits build up naturally, biologically, and so forth. So you'll hear more from me later, but there is our LGBTI definitions.
Okay, so thanks, Brian, and I'm sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties that we've been having. So next, we're going to move on to Oscar Riviera from Church World Service, who's going to talk about his work.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be touching some of the things that CWS has done in order to make LGBTI individuals feel welcome, and also let them know that they're able to help to our case managers in our office so we can better assist them. One of the main ways of doing this is with signage, which indicates that your organization is LGBT friendly, having a sign in the lobby, having a sign in the areas where folks are interviewed or are having conferences one-on-one is very important, for it allows them to know that are coming and that you will try to assist them in their needs as an LGBT refugee or an LGBT person from different parts. Okay. To do this, also, staff needs to become aware of the terms. Staff, we need to educate ourselves, those working with the LGBT community, so that we can assist the LGBT refugees, making sure that we ask the right questions and making sure that we don't stumble when asking questions of an LGBTI person to make it as easy flowing as possible so they don't feel uncomfortable and the staff doesn't feel uncomfortable. Being able to understand the folks that we are helping is very important in housing and finding jobs and all type of their settlement process. So all these are basic tools which really are good to develop to be able to assist the LGBTI community that we're trying to work with. Very important for also our organizations to be recognized in other LGBT organizations in your local community, so they know that you're a point of reference. If places like the LGBT Press Center or LGBT Chamber of Commerce, which is what we have down here, are aware that you're working with LGBT refugees and trying to assist them, they might refer people to you that otherwise would not be able to get assistance. So making sure that your organization is visible to LGBT organizations and that they're aware that you're out there to help them. One critical point also is, as an agency, to make kind of a manual in which you have a list of places that you can refer LGBTI refugees for services, from everything from job placement to places where they can worship, or just basic social gatherings for the LGBT community that we have in all our different communities. Now to the LGBT community organization is very important, so that you become more aware of the different organizations you have, so you become more aware of the different outreach programs, the events they can be part of. to reach out to LGBT refugees. That's very important in the community. To take part, to have your staff take part, so when LGBTI clients come, you are familiar with what's out there and you can better assist them. One of the ways that we have been able to do this is by taking part in events that are organized by our LGBT Chamber of Commerce. We go to these events sometimes and distribute flyers of some of the services that we have in our organization, like immigration legal services, etc. And we are getting to be known as an LGBT-friendly that people can feel comfortable in. Also, making literature of your organizations that include some type of LGBT sign that lets people know just by looking at it that you will assist LGBT refugees. And also, it's important when working with the LGBT refugees that not always will they disclose to you. Sometimes it takes a while. These folks come from places where it's not an easy thing for them to talk about. But the more you make it visible that this is an LGBT-friendly location, the more confidence they have in letting you know what if they are LGBT, and it makes a major difference when you are trying to place them in a job or in housing. Housing is very important to be able to know if they're LGBT. These are just some of the things that I think that are important to when they're starting to work with LGBT refugees from different parts of the world. But importantly is to make sure that our staff feels comfortable in speaking the different terms and gets as educated as possible in the different terms, so they can then project a very positive image of how we could help LGBTI refugees. I think important also is to continue developing relations with LGBT organizations, and also going back every few months and reviewing staff is in the various ways we can help LGBT refugees. I'll turn it over now, I think, to Sylvia.
Oscar, I think this is a perfect segue because it was in 2013 when Church Service was carrying out a lot of those activities when Gulf Coast Jewish Family and Community Services got involved. And part of what we did was an extensive outreach for our county, inviting LGBT serving organizations, service agencies, stakeholders, and legislators. And from that point, and the outreach continued, sometimes on a smaller scale with individual organizations. Especially after the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture, to see an increase in survivors who identified as LGBT or T. So in the fall of 2015, through the collaboration with Refugee Congress's LGBT caucus, we initiated a scale outreach event where we held meetings in Miami. Actually, the meeting was at the LGBT Welcoming Center. Then we have representation from, I think it was refugee resettlement agencies, but namely Oscar's agency, Church World Service. The asylum attorney we work with, Albert Perez. We actually a judge, Judge Bruce Solo, an immigration asylum judge, and a local LGBT organization, Unity Coalition. And I served as moderator for that. One of the very first conversations we have recently been having on bridging services for LGBT refugees. And the meeting that we held really geared toward developing action steps, and we had survivors resources another LGBT organization in Miami who primarily serves trans Latinas. So those two meetings, and actually those two meetings were part of a multi-state initiative spearheaded through Refugee Congress, and Luzal will talk about that. So started out of those multi-city initiatives. So the second meeting was with consensus, and we decided that we were going to have an ongoing collaboration and meetings to continue to build bridges for refugees in the community. So that's December 10th, 2015, for Human Rights Day, the Refugee Congress LGBT caucuses presented at the in Washington, D.C. on their outreach in Capitol Hill, and had an opportunity to present there as well, the outreach and ways that we've been working together to build bridges for LGBT survivors of torture and refugees. So here we are today. I'm going to move this forward if I can. Lessons learned, things we've learned along the way. One obvious things is that South Florida has both the largest refugee population in the U.S., and they have one of the largest LGBT populations in Florida, in Broward County and Miami-Dade area. Two communities were not really communicating with one another. So the other thing that I would say that we learned from this, or that I've learned in doing some of the outreach, is that LGBT organizations strongly identify with the persecution that refugees experience, and we felt that they would help. You know, before, I mean, before all of the media attention and the political rhetoric, we had a hard time explaining who refugees were to some of these organizations. But with flooding of refugee images in the media, those conversations were easier when we started to approach some of the LGBT serving organizations, and they were really eager to help. So they were very identified with the persecution experiences of refugees, and really an understanding that refugees existed because of the recent images and information, and having this desire to help. You know, engage, we learned early on that there are unique roles that LGBT serving organizations play, and Brian will talk about that after I talk a little bit, but that refugee resettlement agencies shouldn't have to duplicate, as the services already exist and are provided by expert individuals and organizations, and vice versa. We provide services to refugees, that is our expertise, and survivors of torture, and LGBT organizations provide services to mainly LGBTI individuals. So, starting these conversations, there was a notable increase in interest, requests for presentations of our work, and some of it happened informally, some of those happened formally. Several of us, including some on this webinar, have been talking about facilitating an upcoming local training in the South Florida region because this work has garnered. So I guess now I want to talk a little bit about, and we can move it forward, a case that we've been working with that I think is interesting, and some lessons were learned from working with this individual. In instances, and I think Oscar mentioned that we don't always know when someone is identified as LGBT or I. But in this case, for this case study, for the sake of this case study, we did know in advance. It was on some of the biodata information that we were receiving an individual who simply said LGBT on the paperwork. So in advance, contact some of the organizations that we've been working with, had a really strong reputation, and staffed the case in advance. The individual hadn't even arrived in the U.S., and they were staffing the case to look at ways that the individual with accessing additional resources and support. And then it went beyond that, such organizations extend their support and help, and namely the Pride Center, SunServe, these are some of the South Florida organizations, Survivors Resources, and others, extend their resources and services not just to the LGBT population, but, the resources that may be available to others. Really good lesson learned and actual with this case study. I will tell you that, staffed the case, and the SunServe organization off to the airport and pick this individual up and create welcome signs. We had one of the local churches, which is the Sunshine Cathedral, which is a welcoming and affirming church, to help this individual as well. So the reception was incredible, the support and resources that they wanted to put forth. Obviously, I didn't have the LGBT organizations or the church go to the airport because, we hadn't even met this individual, and we hadn't even known if this was going to be okay. So I tell everyone, speaking to our refugee who arrived, a day or two later, he was very open to meeting the LGBT organization. We held meet and greet. Actually, even the CEO of SunServe, moment to meet and greet. I mean, the resources, my point is the resources are really there, and the organizations are willing to help our refugees with their extent resources, areas that they understand, but, resettlement agencies work. So follow-up, continue to work with educating the community, bringing information, work collaboration on planning, in advance that we have someone who's coming to connect them early on to additional resources, LGBT organizations. And, when we don't know, as in, and through our assessments, we'll be able to maybe make some referrals afterwards. So it's a very positive experience. The reception has been very positive, and we have actually, the next speaker is one of the individuals who's been very receptive at SunServe, and I will introduce Brian.
Sylvia, I appreciate that, and yes, we absolutely, we're glad to spearhead this individual the vast support network that awaited him as he arrived in South Florida. I do pride myself in living in the county area of Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade for West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors, and Miami. So I'm very happy that everything that we set up for him, he seemed very excited to hear that there was support for everything from counseling to job placement, simply helping him make friends and find a roommate if that's what he chose to his path. So we really didn't know what to expect, and it was a wonderful way to see how this, I don't say hodgepodge in a negative way, but how our network of various resources at the different agencies came together to meet the needs of this individual from housing all the way through to social support, religious support, faith-based support, and just welcoming him to a new space. So I could go on and on about the various resources that we have to offer him, but I think what really made this case unique is that it was the first time that we had someone who had no idea any preconceptions about what to expect, and sitting down and speaking with him about everything that SunServe and the Pride Center and the Sunshine Cathedral could offer. I think that we really saw that we're able to welcome people people and provide them with the supports they need to create a safe and sustainable, successful life here in the United States. So with that, we'll pass it on to Mr. Luzau. Ms. Zhao on.
Connect from what I can see here. Give us, please.
If there are questions about the support network in South Florida or this specific case with which we recently worked this month, I'm happy to entertain those as we wait to lose an eye for human interaction. So please feel free to type those in the chat box to the bottom right of the portal.
I was going to say the same, Brian. This is Celeste. We have questions for Gulf Coast Jewish Family and Community Services Refugee Program. Please type those in the question box as well while we wait for Val. Well, he's not going to be.
Attending a couple of questions here. Yeah, in terms of signage, will you be able to share with us? Yes. If you go to websites that you Google LGBT signage or postage or posters, you will be able to see the various signs that are available. A lot of them are even free that you can request, and they'll be sent to your offices. And they don't have to be huge. They don't have to be huge posters. Sometimes you get like a 3x5 cards that a person can have in their office while interviewing a client. Having the presence of something like that will make a major difference. But yes, if you go to your website that has LGBT signs, you can probably get it from them, either free or with a very minimal cost.
I try to jump back in. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we've had technical difficulties on it. I was sharing that unfortunately we haven't been able to get Vinny Luzau, who leads the LGBTI caucus of Refugee Congress, on the line today. We're going to hop to questions and answers anyway. So I know that you did the one on signage. Someone just asked, what is the last letter I in LGBTI? Brian, could you take that one?
Absolutely. I went ahead and typed into the chat box so that I have something you can copy in case if you like. But the is for intersex, which refers to the spectrum of sex characteristics that we see biologically in human beings. Often these are associated through social norms with a specific gender. For example, the facial hair is a sex characteristic, a secondary sex characteristic that is typically associated with men, with people who are masculine. However, there are many women and individuals who are born with female genitalia that do have more hair or less hair than other men. So we associate those with a specific gender typically, body hair, fat deposits, and whatnot. But there is a spectrum of sex characteristics that we see. So I mentioned earlier intersex, once referred to, and actually is an umbrella term that includes the word hermaphrodite, which is now it's a pretty offensive term, a commonly offensive term, but it's outdated, and it refers to an individual with specifically a penis and a vagina. Intersex, umbrella term for anyone experiencing secondary sex characteristics or primary sex characteristics that are associated with two genders or maybe a gender opposite than their gender identity or sex.
Oh, thank you. And we have another question. How culturally sensitive are the resources that you offer to incoming refugees who may be persecuted for same-sex or gender nonconforming behavior, but don't identify with Western terms? You could start with that one.
Certainly. So, and that's a really good question because you want to tailor and make assumptions that someone will understand, that there's no understanding in some countries of the affinity that someone might have to someone of the same gender or someone who has, sort of a different sort of gender identity. So not be an understanding of that. So it is a very gentle process in asking someone and having, as I mentioned, some of the visual signage in your organization that in many countries is recognizable. In fact, the client that I talked about in the case study, when I took him to his appointment at SunServe just a few days after his arrival, recognized all of the rainbow flags up and down Wilson Drive where the organization is physically located. It was something that was recognizable to him, although he came from another country. But culturally sensitive material would be a thorough, like with the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture, we have a very thorough, comprehensive biopsychosocial spiritual assessment. That's a tool that really gleans information on not just, if the individual is LGBT or I, but, what are the other needs that this individual has and what are some of the barriers? I hope the question.
Sylvia, I'm going to tag on Hannah. Sylvia, this is Brian Wilson with SunServe. The ways that Sylvia and I certainly met practically and I think philosophically in serving this client is came to us to offer support because we do LGBT services. That's what we do specifically. We try to do it well. So I think we try to go to the experts in each field and pull from them. So if we are dealing with somebody who's from a different culture here at SunServe, we discuss with other individuals and constituents who may share that similar culture, similar background, and to educate ourselves on the best way to meet a person where they are. So as opposed to trying to learn and become experts in everything, for example, Eastern terminology for the LGBTI concepts, we would much rather pull in other people who could better meet that person where they are and connect them to us to do what we do best, which is provide those services, which is really what Sylvia did. And that was a good model for moving forward in the future.
So the next question is there anything in, how is the best way to approach an LGBTI organization in terms of starting a collaboration? What would your advice be?
I'll take that. What we did at CWS was we contacted a lot of the LGBT organizations through email and kind of introduced ourselves. But shortly after that, we went to the different LGBT organizations and kind of introduced our services. And we were very welcomed. And at the same time, a lot of organizations were surprised. as we were telling them what we're for, what we're trying to do, and they were very encouraged by the fact that us as a resettlement agency were taking these steps to assist LGBT refugees. So I think just reaching out by email, but also going to the actual organizations with some literature of what you do, and usually you to be able to explain to them the things you do, because what we do day to day to many people is foreign. The work we do with refugees, sometimes we take it for granted, but to people out there, not have the same ideas of what we do, that what takes place in our organization. So it was very welcoming, and I think everybody, you were surprised of how much cooperation you get from the LGBT organizations in your community.
Okay, part to the question that was, what kinds of language barriers did you face, and how did you work through them?
We haven't had major issues because the majority of the folks down here in South Florida, we have a lot of different folks who speak the different languages of the clients that we have received. But also, when you have the language capacity at your offices, that's where the collaboration can come in with these agencies, making sure that if there is someone who doesn't speak a language that one of these organizations might have, having a person to be able to translate and help these folks to be able to get the services.
Okay. So the next question is, do you take a different approach in helping a refugee that has faced violence due to their sexual orientation, sex characteristics, or gender identification versus someone who is a refugee who just happens to identify as LGBTI?
That question. Specifically working with individuals in the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture who have been targeted because of their orientation and tortured at times of their respective governments. And so the approach would be very different, obviously, a strength-based approach that's trauma-informed, addressing, some of the barriers that individuals might face and trying to help them overcome some of those barriers through intensive case management. So that's pretty much the model at the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture. And I definitely share our link on this chat box so that you can maybe look into the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture and also the National Partnership for Community Training, which is a technical assistance program funded through ORR that provides information for centers or for organizations that are working with refugees. So I'll share those two links in chat box. Actually, as we speak.
So question is for all of you. It's what has been your greatest challenge that you've faced in collaborating together?
Biggest collaborating together. I'm going to start saying that we haven't had challenges collaborating together because everyone has decided who's doing what. One of the major successes to working with an LGBT organization and providing these services is to not duplicate efforts, and to not really step over boundaries, and for the LGBT organizations to know what their role is, and for the refugee resettlement to know what their role is. I mean, for both organizations to really outline those things in advance.
With you, we have been able to work together very well. We know what our specific functions are. We collaborate and let each other know what part of the piece that is going to help the LGBTI refugee we would be doing, and has worked really, really great for in South Florida.
Thank you both. So our next question is, how do you assess if a client is comfortable with their LGBTI status and would be open to receiving services from these support networks?
Who needs to take that question, Hannah?
How about you, Sylvia?
I mean, I think you have to gauge someone. So the question is, how do you assess if a client is comfortable with the LGBTI status and would be open to receiving services from those support networks? Question, I think Meredith wrote that question, and what I would say is really you have to go at the pace of the individual, and you have to respect every survivor and every refugee's boundaries. Never make assumptions and use heterosexist terms like, it's very easy to ask someone who presents a certain way about their husband, for example, a female survivor, not to make those heterosexist assumptions, and to really have comprehensive tools in place, be very comfortable, provide your staff with training, normalize these conversations so that when you're asking someone, asking the individual as and not detecting from you that there's this level of discomfort. To answer it.
Yes. So let's do one more question. Are there specific countries or ethnic groups that we should be aware of in terms of people being persecuted or having special needs? Oscar, could you take this one?
Yes, there are many countries where there is they're for being LGBTI. I think Sylvia being from the sort of torture area could give you more detail, but I know that say in Iran and Iraq and these different places from the Middle East, from even part of Africa, that people would be pushed and even killed. We have horrible stories from people coming from these areas of how they've been persecuted and they've had to leave families because they face death if they were to be found that they were LGBTI. I think we might be able to talk more about it from her background.
Actually, there was a recent symposium that took place here in the St. Petersburg area, and Hiram Ruiz, who is the statewide refugee director for the state of Florida, presented on a panel and spoke. And I think that the latest there was 79 countries, where homosexuality, and I'll call it what they dubbed it, punishable. And so, the world, particularly Middle Eastern countries, you will hear, but there's really no one particular country. We've worked with individuals who are coming from Cuba and the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture. Really, some of our clients are, we've had Venezuelans in that program who are with, LGBT, and we have had Middle Easterners. So it just really could be carried out in any country. There is no particular country, but more, there are some countries where there are laws that have been imposed that criminalize homosexuality up to to death as a sentence. So, and actually, the individual we recently met with did, us that was one of the reasons that he had to leave his country in the Middle East.
And to add on to that and tag on to another question that I believe hasn't been addressed, is how do we help refugees who are forced into gender transition as an option to avoid persecution, but actually identify as LG or B? I believe that this is along the same lines of this question, where that trauma, that whether that be torture or in this case, the trauma of being forced into gender transition, reason I believe Sylvia reached out to SunServe is we, at our core, are a community mental health service agency.
Right.
So every program, from our youth program to our senior to our transgender case management, is based in mental health, the mental health field. So there's a big difference between giving someone therapy and somebody receiving counseling and somebody receiving culturally relevant and culturally competent counseling. In this case, referring to LGBTI. So my response to Ms. Goldberg or Senator Goldberg, what I recommend is culturally relevant and competent counseling for someone. We have seen transgender individuals transition back to the, to their original gender. It's not completely uncommon. Gender identity and sexual orientation is fluid. So there is a spectrum on each of those. So for somebody who was forced socially into gender transition, I would recommend that they seek one-on-one counseling in an agency like SunServe. We offer it for little to no cost, so that can have somebody who's very familiar with the complexity of gender identity and sexual orientation issues, help them through transition back, or help them in reconciling that they've received with their sexual orientation and/or gender identity.
Right, we talked about that at our meeting, Brian. I remember we talked about some folks that are coming from Iran are being forced to have a gender reassignment surgery and it's state-sponsored, so in fact it would be torture because the only way that they would be allowed to live their life as a gay man is if they were a woman. So we talked at our meeting, and when I was providing some educational background to SunServe about the work that we do.
So thank you to all of you for your thoughtful questions for our speakers, and thanks to our speakers for joining us today. If you're interested in going a little deeper on this subject, and I saw some questions that seem to be a little more detailed, you can have a chance to speak with a few of our speakers, Welcoming America, in a smaller setting. We're going to be hosting a deeper dive conversation on Monday, March 7th at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So you will just go to, we have a site up that will show the link to bit.ly/LGBT deeper dive. Fill in a little bit of information and let us know that you're planning to join so we can plan to send you the call information. We'd love to have you. We will be emailing out and posting the resources and recording of this webinar within the next week. And as a reminder, you can find resources for this webinar and all of our past webinars on our website at welcomingrefugees.org. So this is our webinar for today. Thank you for hanging with us through the technical difficulties. We're so glad that all of you joined us, and thank you again to all of our speakers for their work and sharing their expertise with us today. Have a great day.